Hello everyone, and welcome to my talk on data-driven learning for younger learners, current issues, future directions. I'm Dr. Peter Crosthwaite from the University of Queensland, Australia. Advances in the availability, functionality and user-friendliness of language corpora have resulted in a concomitant rise in the number of DDL studies focusing on younger learners in recent years, with generally positive qualitative and even quantitative results now finally reported in the literature. However, there are still a number of barriers to the implementation and integration of DDL in primary and secondary classroom, mainly involving the lack of pedagogic processing of existing adult-focused materials, a lack of software for specific use with younger learners, and a lack of corpus literacy reported for in-service or pre-service teacher trainees of younger learners that often leads to a reluctance to adopt DDL pedagogy. This presentation discusses the affordances of direct hands-on corpus use by pre-tertiary language learners for the purposes of data-driven learning, while also outlining the challenges involved in the successful implementation of DDL with younger learners. I will summarize some of my successes and occasional failures of DDL with younger learners to date, while reflecting on strategies to increase the adoption of DDL for younger learners in future research. Data-driven learning typically involves direct learner engagement with language corpus data, either through the use of teacher-printed concordance materials or learner-led hands-on corpus consultation, involving concordancing software or increasingly the use of online, multimodal corpus-based applications that allow for students to learn and internalize statistical and contextual information about language in use as they work as language detectives with every student as Sherlock Holmes. DDL as a pedagogical approach is proposed to promote autonomous and constructivist learning in its adoptees, in that learners learn best when they discover or can be led to discover themselves. DDL provides its adoptees increased opportunities for data-enhanced, learner-centered focus on form, allowing for inductive learning where the learner is responsible for the detective work, as well as allowing language teachers to aid learners' deductive reasoning through guided support and scaffolding. Moving on to data-driven learning for younger learners, despite a large increase in the number of DDL studies in the last 10 years, as corpora increase in size and accessibility, and as corpus applications increase in processing power, user-friendliness and data visualization, there still remains a dearth of DDL research that deals with its affordances of DDL for younger learners. 3 recent meta-analyses of the DDL literature have pointed to a severe lack of empirical data for DDL at the secondary years of education. And at the time of writing, just over 5% of published studies explicitly state that they were conducted in high school settings, while the number of DDL studies on primary age data could probably be counted on one hand. But can younger learners do corpus consultation? For many parents who live through the pre-internet era, the connected world we live in today is now very different from the one that we were raised in. Today, many children are learning about language through internet-connected tablet devices and interactive games, are searching for information online through search engines or wikis, are viewing instructional videos online, and are communicating with others in real time via video conferencing and chat software. While a welcome and fascinating development, we need to be careful not to assume that younger learners are already equipped with the technical knowledge and ICT skills required to adopt DDL-like learning practices, as one might expect from younger learners as so-called digital natives. While younger children may indeed have acquired a range of ICT skills even at the primary levels of education, there may still be a gap between their technical abilities and the kind of information literacy, inductive noticing, and deductive reasoning abilities required for successful engagement with corpus data as would normally be required for DDL to be effective. Younger learners are also developing in their first language literacy, leaving sudden exposure to a multitude of authentic first language corpus data potentially problematic, and corpus output may require significant modification to be comprehensible. Therefore, there is still a significant role to play for teachers of younger learners in effectively preparing their students for DDL, and there should be no expectation that younger learners will simply pick it up themselves if left to their own devices. That said, if younger learners are able to receive initial guidance in the basics of corpus literacy, it does not take them very long to develop autonomous and rather idiosyncratic corpus usage habits. For example, in my paper with Anita Stell in 2019 in my edited volume Data-Driven Learning for Younger Learners, I introduced the online Sketch Engine for Language Learning, or SKEL platform, with 2 Year 5 boys within a private home tutoring setting. Overall, both students reacted positively towards corpora as a tool that could help them resolve lexical issues in their writing, and both reported higher general self-efficacy as a result of their newfound language problem-solving skills after just 5 short sessions with corpora. In particular, the children took the opportunity to progress through the DDL training and revisions at their own pace, eschewed the query syntax provided by the expert, and reported frequently accessing the corpus platform long after its introduction, something less commonly reported in studies involving even adult learners. However, while a fantastic resource, SKEL may not be suitable for many younger learners. For primary age learners, traditional approaches to input enhancement and exposure to target forms in the primary L1, L2 learner classroom include teachers read aloud stories and homebook reading, alongside multimodal approaches such as songs and physical gestures, as well as explicit teaching and rote memorization. Certainly for primary age learners, having access to multimodal forms of data for DDL is very important, given that such learners progress in their literacy development from pictures with word captions to picture books, then on to chapter books. While there are corpora of children's chapter books available for use with traditional concordances, as well as corpora containing graded text that are specifically written for learners at primary or secondary grades, there are still few concordances designed specifically for use with primary age students. However, this is where the work of my fellow colleagues in this symposium comes in, as they demonstrate some amazing tools being trialed with younger learners in the Japanese context, which I'm sure you'll find quite inspirational. Moving on now to issues with the integration of corpora into the younger learner classroom. While teachers of younger learners are very familiar with the terms CALL and ICT, they are of course quite unfamiliar with the term DDL. While numerous CALL technologies, including smartphones, PowerPoint, and e-whiteboards, have now become normalized within many teaching and learning contexts, the integration and normalization of corpus technology into pre-tertiary classroom practice has failed to materialize, despite numerous recently reported innovations and an increase in empirical support. Why is this the case? Here I follow Lee's 2011 paper's quote, who suggests the appropriate and effective use of corpora in the classroom is partly a technical issue, but primarily a pedagogical one. While we are seeing more and more training interventions in the literature, teachers must learn how to apply the technical competence gained post-corpus training into appropriate didactic and dialogic opportunities for meaningful interaction between themselves, the corpus technology, and their students, if such learners are to appropriately develop the type of constructivist, take-charge approach to learning espoused by DDL within their current practice. However, corpus literacy among teacher trainees is still sorely lacking, despite studies such as Chen, Flowerdew, and Anthony 2019. Many teachers of younger learners also lack both the technical, content, and pedagogical knowledge, also known as TPAC, to integrate CALL applications, including but not restricted to corpora, into their teaching practice. Therefore, more focus needs to be given to developing teachers' use of technology that can support their own pedagogical work and core teaching performance. This quote from Hutchison 2012 summarizes my point here. In response, I've recently been working on DDL interventions with teacher trainees both in Indonesia and Australia, involving lesson planning activities following online DDL training. Following these sessions, I found that most trainees lack the required knowledge of DDL relevant instructional strategies, which led to the proposed DDL use within some trainees' lesson plans, failing to allow the learners to meet the lesson's stated objectives. This then requires corpus linguists to get much more involved with teachers at the lesson planning and design level, so as to help trainees develop strategies to integrate DDL technology into their course content and instructional routines. I've just submitted a paper on this topic to Language Learning and Technology, so watch this space for further news. In addition, the idea of pedagogic processing, or the simplifying of corpus materials for use with younger learners, can greatly increase the likelihood of success with younger learners' initial forays into corpus consultation. Commonly used online corpora, such as BYU COCA or the BAWE within Sketch Engine, as well as popular corpus tools such as ANCONC, are primarily designed for research purposes and/or promote L1 linguistic representativeness. Pedagogic corpora, on the other hand, are specifically designed to accommodate specific L1 and L2 learners, levels, and needs. A useful example is the Sacodel pedagogic corpus developed by Brown and Perez Paredes that is composed of data taken from video recordings of teenagers' oral interactions on everyday topics across multiple L1s. Fanny Mounier, in her chapter in my edited volume, also suggests expanding the scope of tools and tasks commonly used in DDL activities by leveraging tools that promote constructivist learning through data consultation, but that are different in form and function from traditional concordances. By generating appropriate accompanying tasks that require the same kind of noticing and pattern sleuthing processes as found under a more typical DDL approach, one may greatly expand their repertoire of available DDL tools to include more multimodal resources and, crucially, tools that younger learners in particular can both easily use and find appealing. In terms of future directions now, one of the major issues still facing those who wish to increase DDL adoption in younger learners' contexts is simply a lack of empirical data on its effectiveness in the classroom. Of the few DDL studies that have been performed in younger learner contexts, most studies deal with aspects of teacher training for younger learners or younger learner teacher reactions to corpus use, leaving data from students themselves sorely lacking. This situation is likely because teacher training context is as far as most researchers have been able to penetrate into pre-tertiary school systems to conduct DDL research, due to the numerous ethical and bureaucratic complexities involved in actually getting access to young children from whom to collect data. In addition, despite initial positivity during such training, many teachers remain skeptical of how younger learners will react to or engage with corpus use. And given the vast range of other workload demands placed on primary and secondary teachers, many are still unwilling to take the risk of even partial classroom implementation during actual teaching periods. These rational fears are potentially preventing the kind of large-scale funded projects required to empirically test the affordances of DDL with younger learners from getting off the ground. And it may take more significant developments involving DDL with older learners in mainstream education before the pendulum can eventually swing to increased opportunities for younger learners. Another area for future research is that while many DDL studies have been conducted in technologically rich Western or East Asian countries, the benefits of DDL are still yet to be realized in regions such as the Middle East and Southeast Asia. As a result, little is currently known about teacher trainees or educators' acceptance of or preparation for DDL in these regions. This situation may be reflected of a digital divide between relatively ICT poor countries and their richer neighbors. More studies from other contexts, including South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia, are of course welcome. Additionally, it would be beneficial for the field as a whole if more DDL studies involving younger learners were conducted where the target language is other than English. This is highlighted as a key factor in Nina Vatkina's 2020 paper, where she talks about the underutilization of corpora in mainstream education. Vatkina calls for a broadening of context for DDL beyond EFL and ESL, broadening access to DDL resources, increased scaffolding of DDL for teachers, and an increase in open DDL resources and corpora for general use. I hope you found this overview of the field of DDL for younger learners useful, and I now hand over to my partners in this symposium who are doing their best to produce the kind of materials and pedagogical innovations that will hopefully expand the reach of corpora and DDL into primary and secondary classrooms in Japan and later the world. Thanks for listening.